Francis, your work on episode 5 of Love Story really stood out to me in how precisely the edit shapes the emotional perspective of the relationship in Love Story as it shifts. It's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, look, one thing I found really fascinating is how episode 5 gradually strips the glamour off the relationship and leaves something more fractured and probably like emotionally unstable. How conscious were you of pacing as a way of dismantling the fairy tale?
Um, Very conscious because it's a tool that we all use, to be able to tell the story correctly and take the audience in an emotional journey. So yeah, like you said, I think the beauty of the show, in the first four episodes, we've established this beautiful romance, and then episode five, there's a bit of a turning point in the relationship of John and Carolyn, but not just them, the way that pressures around them, whether it's the paparazzi or it's their family, how it starts to take a toll on the relationship. So I think you can see, hopefully, in the edit, when they're interacting with each other, seems like things kind of have a natural flow in the conversation. But when things start to break, and I think to me, the break happens, when the first proposal goes down and she says no, there's a bit of a fracture there. And the way that they start communicating with each other also changes. Like maybe it's not so gentle, the pacing is a little bit faster. They're more, I wouldn't say attack, but they're a little harsher in the way that they, talk to each other. So the pacing reflects that. And it evolves, it's slowly changing and changing as we get through the episodes through the episode with the blow up happen in the park, the fight scene.
Yeah, yeah.
Is you know, an intense stress scene to work on. But
I
yeah, I
can
mean,
imagine.
it's cool for sure.
In that we will talk about the battery park stuff because that is insane. It's so well done. But I always want to fast forward straight to that final yes moment because what really struck me was the edit moves in really close and strips away the world around Carolyn. And given how much of the episode is about pressure from the outside world, what was behind the decision to isolate them in this way right when she's making that decision?
I'm so glad that you caught that. That's awesome. Because that was intentional. I feel like if when you're watching the episode and you look at, let's say, the scenes, for example, of them in the apartment, a lot of the times we keep them, both of them, in the frame. They're together, The battery park scene happens, we go more into the singles, more into the argument. But the moment you introduce that element of a paparazzi, it goes from being an intimate scene to then being a sort of spectacle, a show. So I wanted to make sure the moment that we have the introduction of a paparazzi, the audience becomes a little bit of, here you go, it's a presentation for you guys. You're just as guilty of this.
Yeah.
But then the scene evolves, the emotion that these characters go through evolves. It's not if you think about the scenes as one after the other one, I don't think it works. You have to treat it as one whole piece, one whole emotional arc with ups and downs. So yeah, there's the explosion of a park, but then slowly they're discussing it, they're sharing their feelings. And so then in the way the coverage was, then I just started getting closer and closer and closer because we took people out with the introduction of a paparazzi, but then I didn't want them to be spectators the whole time. I want them to go in. I want them to feel this intimate moment with the actors. So towards the end, I just had to stay closer and closer. I mean, it's also partly the performances that Paul and Sarah are given that is really hard to stay away from their faces because there's so much emotion there. But yeah, I'm so glad I'm so glad you caught on that because it was very intentional. I just wanted when we got to the end and Sarah says yes, Sarah's character Carolyn says yes. it's like that breath, just you went through a journey with them, and
Yeah.
that I feel like you really get it because you've gone through pressure, 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 and
Yeah.
getting tighter with them.
Absolutely. It really lands beautifully. In fact, as a follow-up, just more generally, what does proximity give you emotionally, perhaps, that a wider, more observational or contextual frame wouldn't?
Yeah, I think, there's something like that saying the eyes are the windows to the soul. There's something that the moment you're tighter and you're able to see a character's eyes, there's so much that's being said there. That there's just, I mean, listen, there are whites that are beautiful and it's like a painting, and there's a lot of that in the show too. But the moment you get tighter, you're just telling so many more things. There's a lot of subtext in there. I think for me also, like, maybe it hits me more in the because of the way that I work, that after I've done an assembly in a scene, I watch everything without sound. So I rely on that a lot. I rely on what I'm seeing and making sure that the actors are, sort of seeing each other. And the story is being told that way. So
Wow.
yeah, I mean, a good close up to me is, magic.
Yeah. Magic. So when you're getting that coverage from the DP, obviously that's in your toolbox. And
Yeah.
the looking at these footage without or the edit without sound is such a great idea because if you're picking up on things, particularly through the eyes, it's doing
Mhm.
so much of the storytelling. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow, I've not heard that before. So look, thinking about the Battery Park scene, I was really looking forward to how this was going to be done, given that we
Yeah.
all kind of remember how this played out in the media. So when you're cutting material like that, that is more emotional than plot driven. What are you actually watching or listening for rhythm wise? Is it performance, dialogue, cadence, shot length, or something more instinctive?
Oh, I think it's maybe a combination of, all of the above. I think that was a tricky scene to edit because it has a lot of elements to it, but at the core, at the center of it, you want to make sure that we're following John and Carolyn. We're following this really intimate discussion that they're having because it's important to the development of this relationship. So that is key. That is, first. And then I think you can start sprinkling the other things. Like when the shots that we use of the paparazzi, that was the one bit that we worked on the most, and it went through variations. Like at one point we were using more beta cam footage than we were using the stuff that was shot with our regular camera, but then that moved on to another episode. So there was no need to use it there. Then we went through, do we just play it silent? Do we play it with the sound of camera clicking, which is what we landed on at the end of the episode? So yeah, I mean, that's the main goal. Every time with every variation of a scene, the main objective was we just can't lose what the core of the scene, which is these two characters fighting it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a tricky scene to cut for sure. And I mean, the episode's co-edited with Adam Penn, and that was a example of two ideas coming together, two versions kind of coming together, and looks like it
Wow.
worked.
Yeah, it
Okay.
did. It did. So, like, just to follow up on that too, when do you typically find yourself tightening scenes as emotion escalates, or sometimes doing the opposite and letting moments breathe so that we get even more uncomfortable as the discomfort lands?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on the type of scene, but yeah, I tend to not go really tight if I can. I want to feel all those
Yeah,
moments of awkwardness first. And then I can see, oh, maybe it's too much. Maybe I gotta pull back on some of that. But I want to feel the awkwardness first.
yeah,
So I don't mind having a really long version first that then starts to get stripped down. I think an example of that would be the dinner scene. The sort of second dinner scene that we have in Hyannisport. That was one scene where the awkward beats were very important, and we played a lot with that. Like too long, too short. Okay, no, we can push it more because it is an awkward situation. So yeah, those moments of silence are key, are very important. It's a
Like
tool for us.
dinner scenes like that, I would
Mhm.
imagine for an editor can be so complicated because there's so many competing priorities. There's eye lines, there's people's
Yeah.
reactions. So I'm curious because a lot of what's going on at that table is obviously quite internal. The performances are internal. There's a lot of awkwardness. What
Yeah.
actually tells you the exact moment to leave a face versus cutaway? Is that just a subjective how you're feeling when you watch the actual performance?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of it comes down to intuition and how it just gut feeling, like feels right to cut at this moment, and then you can move to the next thing. But I guess keeping in mind always the purpose of the scene, like why do we want to tell with this scene? So then you're always striving for that. And then you keep in mind that, I mean, you can edit a scene so many different ways. There's variations like that scene when there are variations of in the earlier cuts. Are we more on Carolyn's character just taking it all in, or do we see the family talk first, which is kind of where we landed? Because it felt important to have, for us being at the table here for the first time, seeing how that was a normal conversation for them. So there needs to be a natural flow to them. They're just bouncing responses of each other. So the edit needed to kind of match the same thing of like, yeah, this is typical. This is a normal Sunday night. We're just gonna have a conversation about politics. And then when we cut to Carolyn, it becomes kind of all right, we're kind of the odd ones out here. And, that's where the audio kind of comes in play. We slow down the audio and it's more in her head. Because you would feel like that in that sort of situation,
Yes,
like,
of course.
let me just tunnel moment. I'm just going to be in my own world here.
Yeah.
Um, so that was kind of playing around with those moments. But like, I mean, priority, I think at first I went more with, I have to be more on Sarah because she's sort of the audience member there. But then the moment you do that, because you're focused on her, you miss what the conversation is. And the conversation felt just as important, even though it's like, it's politics. So it's like if you want to follow it, but it just says so much about the family.
Yeah. All these little tricks that we as the audience aren't really noticing specifically, but we are taking it in subliminally. And it really does assist us in trying to work out what is happening and who's winning, who's losing, or whatever, however you want to frame a particular adversarial type of relationship, which is what was definitely going on at that table. But what really fascinates me about your work is that when you're editing scenes built on implication and emotional like manipulation or hesitation, it really fascinates me how you decide what to clarify and what to leave suspended and just allow the audience to kind of just go along with some of the mystery until it gets figured out later. What happens in those situations? Do you sometimes question yourself, like, oh, I don't know if this is too oblique or whether it's too express? Talk me through that.
100%. But I think in those moments, it's important to remember, like I feel like we all go through that when we're putting an episode together, a film together, because it's just you with the material by yourself for so long before the director comes in, that you're gonna question your choices. That's normal. But I think remembering that it's not just you working on the project, there's gonna be, the director comes in, then the producers come in, and it's a collaborative process. So that takes some of the pressure off.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, sorry, I just completely lost the thread of what we were talking about.
Well, I'll pick up on what you said, and that
Yeah.
is like the collaboration aspect is key. Obviously, you're coming in, generally speaking, later in the piece, but I wonder how early you come into the creative conversation on a show like this. Are you shaping tone alongside the director and showrunner from an assembly stage, or are you inheriting a more defined vision?
Well, this was a bit of a different situation. Normally, the editor would come in early on, sort of pre-production. So we're involved in those conversations, not so much like, saying, but more listening to what the director and the showrunners want for the show, for the scene, for the tone of the character. So we're there listening and making sure that when we start getting that material, what they mention is what we're saying, because if there's something that is not quite landing, then it's up to us to kind of raise, a flag and say, hey, just be aware that this is maybe not working exactly how you wanted it to, or the intention behind, the conversation we had in the script stage was, yeah, you come in early on, but for this episode, when I came in, the episode was already shot, and I came in, towards the like sort of midpoint.
All right.
So I wasn't privy to those conversations, but that's where the beauty of working with Adam came in. Adam edited the pilot episode of the show, and he also worked on it as a producer. So he was sort of, creative glue for all the episodes, maintain continuity. So he was somebody that I could rely on if I had a question on, tone or how things were set up. I mean, I watched the pilot when I jumped in, so I had an idea of where they were going. But he was somebody that I relied on because I wasn't privy to those conversations from the beginning.
Yeah, that's
But
really
yeah, it's
interesting.
different.
So because there's a variety of editors on the series, but of course with Adam as the through line, it
Mhm.
allowed you all, I guess, to keep consistent in terms of
Yeah,
tone and vision, but also to put your own stamp on it. As you know, given that you're all individual editors who have your own point of view.
yeah,
Um, I'm curious though, on Ryan Murphy shows. He's obviously he's such an uber producer and creates some of the most fantastic TV, but they often embrace a heightened emotion or visual stylization. And I felt like Love Story feels comparatively restrained and intimate. And as an editor, how did you preserve the like emotional realism inside the material that still carries this enormous cultural mythology around it?
yeah. I mean, for me, it was important. So it's a bit of a tricky thing because I came in to the show not really knowing much about the story. I didn't grow up in the States, so I wasn't aware of, how big that, I wasn't here during that era, so I wasn't aware of how big it is within the sort of American culture. Just in a way, I'm glad that I didn't know. But it's also, you know, understanding that we are telling a drama series, it's not a documentary. So the focus is we just gotta make sure that the characters that we're presenting are as grounded and as human as possible so that the audience can connect with them. Because they're the ones that are going to guide us through this whole emotional journey and the emotional arc that we're going to go through. So yeah, I mean, it was something that I was aware of, but there's just the beauty of the way this show was like every department just came together to yeah, I mean it does feel restrained compared to the other shows, but it's just maybe it's just also the nature of the story. It's not, it's a
Mm,
love story between two people.
yeah,
Um but yeah, I mean, it's very different when I've worked on a couple of his shows, and each one of them feels very different every time that that I've worked on them.
yeah,
But yeah, but there was something about this one. This one just felt more, to me at least, more kind of character driven, and like more relying on the emotion than anything. It wasn't so
yeah,
much about like the obviously the sort of the beauty of the cinematography or like the fashion, the hair, everything that did the job beautifully. But I
yeah.
was just performance was key. Like the performances that I got from every actor was just so beautiful, and you just wanted to make sure that you were doing justice to all the work that they did.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
it
Yeah,
was such a focus on that.
yeah, it had to be. Those two leads are incredible in this show.
Yeah,
Just uncanny in their ability to not only look like them, but just to capture their essence.
yeah,
Um, I have one final question, not necessarily about Love Story, but more just a general talking shop, because I'm
yeah,
fascinated when I talk to editors. What actually happens on a project when you don't get the coverage that you need? When perhaps something's happened on set or the DP hasn't necessarily done what they're supposed to do? How on earth do you save a scene when you don't have enough footage to really make it
yeah.
work?
Um, Okay, so I think you go through different stages. You go through like a crying stage of what am I gonna do now? Then you go through the stage of questioning, life choices.
Yeah.
Um, but then you forget all of that and remember that's why we're here. You just gonna try and make the pieces work the best way possible. I think
Mm.
whenever, and times that I've had that happen to me and it's been, like there was something went off on set, something went wrong. I just have to kind of forget that happened and just try and make it work with the pieces that I got. I don't care about what on set. This is the material that I got. I gotta make it work. That's my job. I gotta make it work. So then I just focus performance key. That's my my light, the thing that I have to focus on, and then just remember that I'm in a way the first audience member, and I want to make sure that I'm end up with something that I enjoy. So hopefully the audience member will also enjoy. Like I'm doing this for them in a way. Um, so it just kind of gives me a little bit extra push of like, I know you didn't get the
Yeah,
material, but try and make it work the best that
that's
you can.
it. As a professional, as an artist, but you do make it work, don't you? But it's so refreshing just to hear, yeah, 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 I have the crash out moment. I'm like, oh my God, this is a nightmare.
100%.
And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
you pull
yeah.
yourself together and you get on with
No,
it.
I think you have to. You have to have that crash out moment, or otherwise, it's a robot that's working on it. No, no, no. You
Exactly.
you you have to. You have to. Just, I mean, you like we all know the pressure of being on set. We understand that things go wrong all the time. You can't help it. But there are those moments where you're just like, guys, I just needed this one thing. And then I mean, it's just, you just have to get creative. And we have
Yeah,
so many tools. There's so many things that we can do here, so many cheats that we can do in editorial to make things work. That's
yeah,
why you can't complain for too long. You just
yeah.
complain for
You
a
just
little
get on
bit.
with it.
Yeah.
I just find the whole editing process so magical and scientific and mysterious. It's a real art and science. And on that note, Francis, it is such a thoughtful look into how editing shapes emotional truth. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. This was awesome. Thank you so much.